afternoon, everybody. I see some faces already. I actually recognize some former students and some colleagues. This is wonderful. It's great to see you. My name is Leora Lands, for those I do not know. Welcome to Sha'S, what we're calling our town hall, but it's really a conversation with some members of our advisory board. I'm going to ask those of you who may not have your video off to please do so at this time so we can see our speakers specifically and focus, but you will be able to hear us. So thank you for doing that. I'm a proud faculty member of Shaw. I teach marketing and digital marketing at the undergrad level, at the grad level, and I'm chair of our Master of Management and Hospitality program for our graduate students. And I'm here today with Dean Arun Upneja, Dean of Shaw, and some very esteemed members of our advisory board. And I may ask you to wave to make sure folks can see you. But first we have Ian Carter. If you could give a quick wave, Ian, thank you. Ian is the President, Global Operations and Development for Hilton Worldwide and Vice Chairman of the board. So thank you, Ian, for being with us. This means a lot to us.
Pleasure.
Thank you. We have Anne Fastiggi. Anne, if you want to give a wave so everyone can see you as well. Anne is an alum of BU. She's at the Global Consumer Practice, specializing in hospitality and leisure with Spencer Stewart, Hospitality Executive Search and Human Capital and Talent firm. So thank you, Anne, for being with us and sharing your expertise as well. It means a lot. We also have our revered Professor Michael Quagg. Professor Quagg, if you can wave hello. Michael is professor of the practice here at Shaw with some interesting insights from an economic standpoint on what's going on in our industry at the moment. We also have Wolfram Schaefer. Wolfram, if you could give a wave.
Hi.
Great. Thank you. Wolfram is president and CEO of Avendra. We will learn more about everyone's roles momentarily. And finally on our panel, we have Robert Vale. Robert, if you could give a quick wave.
Hey, everyone. How are you?
Super. Thank you for being here. And Robert, who is a Shaw alum, class of '85, is Director of Innovation and Commercialization at the Boston Beer Company. So thank you all for being with us and for being right now we've got about 63 participants, undergrads, grads, alumni, faculty, and just members of the Shaw community. So thank you all. While we are on a Zoom call, this will be like a webinar. So again, if you could keep your video off at this point, that would be great. Charlie Flomenhoft, who is the assistant to the dean, is assisting us with this today. So he has kept everyone on mute, but we will have the opportunity to ask questions. Of course, you can go into the chat and ask your questions. Dean Upneja and I will be checking periodically to make sure that we answer as many of them as possible for our panelists today, who are happy to answer your questions throughout the course of this conversation. We anticipate that we'll be on for about 45 minutes or so this afternoon. I do want to start with Dean Upneja. If you could give a quick wave, Dean Upneja, just with a couple of comments to get us started before we get to asking our panelists some questions. Dean?
Sure. Thank you, Leora. Good afternoon. I would like to welcome everyone here today, our distinguished panelists, our wonderful, wonderful moderator, Professor Lands, and of course, all the outstanding students and alumni that are online, and those who will be listening once it is on our website. You know, this is a unique time in our society where practically everything is either shut down or in the process of shutting down. And all of us in the hospitality industry are bearing the brunt of the war against COVID-19. This has majorly impacted our students and alumni for the school. A lot of seniors tell me their last semester of college came to a premature end. Graduation ceremonies have been postponed. Jobs and internships are in limbo or canceled. Classes are remote and virtual. And many of our students had to leave their dorms on an extremely short notice. Our Shaw community and hospitality friends and colleagues are facing challenges that none of us have ever faced before. So in all of this turmoil, there are so many questions that are bubbling in all of our minds. Just as an example, what does the temporary closure of the hospitality sector mean to me? For those who are our alumni already in the industry, or those who are planning to join it. Is it still a wise move to join this industry? Should I be considering alternative careers? We've had these closures before. So what does previous experience with these closures inform us about how long will this go on? When will we return to normal? And finally, many students are asking, what should we do during this summer where there are no jobs that we can go and work in? While today's session may not have all the answers, but it will help us to hear from the trenches and from the senior leaders in our industry so that we can have a much wider perspective. As Professor Lance said, feel free to ask questions on the chat. And at this point, let's take it away, Professor Lance.
Thank you, Dean Upneja. I'm going to ask each panelist just to share a quick elevator speech of what your role is in the industry, and have you ever seen an economic situation like this before? Ian, if we can start with you, please.
Thank you, Leora. My responsibilities are, for the growth and development of Hilton around the world. So I have a pretty good perspective of what's been happening, firstly in Asia, and then what's happened across into Europe, Middle East, Africa, and Americas. And we've been faced with what I would describe as unprecedented times. I'm sure that's a well-worn phrase by now. However, it really is. And whilst we can draw some comparisons to 2008 and the crash, which I'm sure we'll talk about as we get into the discussion, there are other parts to what we're facing right now which are truly unprecedented. So it's forcing us to really think differently. And right now, of course, our focus is entirely on our people, whether it be our guests or our owners or our team members, as to how we deal with the pressures that they're all under and the changes that we have to our lives, basically, over the next X number of months.
Thank you, Ian. And Anne, if you could share a bit about your role in the industry, and have you seen anything like this before?
Sure. So I have actually lived through the bursting of the dot-com bubble and the subsequent, post 9/11 interruption to travel and some of the changes that have become permanent in the way in which we travel around the world after 9/11. And been in my current profession when we hit the 2008 and 2009 downturn. I will say this doesn't feel like any of those. But, by way of background, I've been, as you mentioned, I'm a BU alum and found myself quite serendipitously in the world of executive recruiting. I work for one of the largest leadership advisory firms in the world that's best known for its executive recruiting. And my specialty for about 15 years now has been in hospitality. And so this definitely feels a little different because it's very uncertain. Nobody quite knows when this is going to hit its peak or when it will calm down. But the good thing is, I think it's largely viewed by everybody as a temporary thing. So we can get into more of that later. But I have lived through these other, blips, and and can share war stories later on some of those experiences.
Fair enough. Wolfram, I'd love to have an introduction from you.
Yeah, hi, I'm Wolfram Schäfer, and I'm the president and CEO of Avendra. Avendra is a company that does procurement services for hotels, but also for some other industry, food service and senior living and other places where you serve people. This is the first time that I experienced a downturn like this, honestly, because essentially overnight, hotels just stopped buying. The vendor negotiates contracts, whether it's food items, whether it's amenities, whether it's textiles and things like that. And we're seeing closures all over the place with hotels just shutting down. We're seeing people nobody's in the hotel. It means like nobody goes to restaurants are closed, which is kind of like amazing. We are to some degree some sort of a fixed cost business, because once you negotiate a contract and you manage a contract and you serve clients, whether one hotel buys up the contract or 1,000 makes no difference. But maintaining it is people intensive for us. And if 90% of the business falls away, essentially, that's obviously very devastating for us.
Thank you. Robert, your role in the industry, and have you seen anything like this before?
So I've been coming up on my 30th year at Boston Beer Company, and I've seen a whole bunch of these ups and downs. But I think the thing that to me is most going on is the uncertainty and what can happen. And actually, as of today, Constellation just had their breweries closed down in Mexico for the month of April because they were deemed by the country as a non-essential. So these things just come as waves of one after another of what could possibly come down. And I think it is different from the past because of the unexpected that can change hourly of where we are. We have been lucky enough to be able to stay open as in an essential business, but it is also amazing to watch our volume completely go to nothing inside of all of our on-premise across the United States. And, you know, there's other parts to this that, you know, you think of big and you think of small, and we're, you know, our industry is now worried about out-of-code products. And that's just one tiny little element of a restaurant or a hotel, of thinking about all the food that has been wasted and has to then be brought back in, and all the cost of that. So we're seeing dramatic changes, I think, by the hour, and trying to do our best to stay on top of it.
Thank you. Michael, if you could share your role, of course, in the industry for those who may not know, and just a little bit about your view and what you've seen.
Well, throughout the semester in my accounting and finance class, I mentioned last semester, 2020 will be bad year economically and financially, because we normally talk about a Black Swan event, and we have 3 gray rhinos out there at the gate of a party place. We are in the last 10 years from 2008, after financial crisis, all the asset pricing got appreciated, real estate value went up, everybody enjoy their 401k appreciation, and 120 some months went going up with a steady growth. But a lot of consulting companies says 2020, we're going to be facing new normal, which means low productivity, low growth, low GDP growth like this. But at the same time, we have a very low unemployment rate. Something went wrong because of those 3 gray rhinos waiting out there at the parking spot is national debt level and corporate debt level and consumer debt level. For example, the national debt to GDP ratio is over 100%. Many countries having that insolvent debt ratio. So something went wrong. But I told my students, I tried to explain hospitality business position in relation to other economic sector. For example, in S&P 500 can be classified into 11 different economic sector. Hospitality business is positioned in consumer discretionary. Discretionary means having a choice among consumers depending on economic climate. So 2020, so if you look at RevPAR growth, ADR growth, and supply in the pipeline in the hotel industry, definitely something negative things gonna pop out. And those are 3 gray hours all of a sudden run into our party place. That Black Swan event triggered, and that COVID-19 came out. So now all of a sudden, nobody knows. We never expect to have that big Black Swan event, and actually much bigger than Nassim Taleb and NYU mentioned Black Swan. So now all the central bank all over the world coming with the new QE. Now we call QQE. I think some of you in industry heard about. You used to say quantitative easing. Now we add one more Q, qualitative and quantitative easing. That comes out from federal government and central bank. and their policy is a lower the interest rate to 0 level. If federal funds rate in USA is 0, and Japan and Sweden and Switzerland and German is a negative interest rate. So a lot of, we talk about now next normal coming in, how we're gonna face with this black swan event. So now, as I mentioned, the fact last week I mentioned, we're gonna have a lot of stimulus package coming in. A lot of hospitality business, especially restaurant segment. We have a lot of small and mom and pop operations. SBA bridge loan. For example, I found out economic injury disaster loan application. There's a maximum $2 million at 3.75%, which is much lower than prime rate comes out. So all these things, I know not directly relate to us, but we got to understand what's going on in economic and finance environment.
So
That's what
Michael,
I'm
if I could
trying-
stop you there actually, because I
Okay.
do want to talk about, no, because we covered a lot of things that I know we're going to cover more
Mhm.
with our other panelists
Okay.
as well. So thank you for that, because that was
Alright.
the sobering message that I think we were all going to hear.
Mhm.
But I guess to one of the points that you've made, Michael, in terms of the government and what kind of help are we getting for the government? Ian, are you able to share with us in terms of what the hotel or the hospitality industry has done to advocate for help from the government from your perspective?
Yeah, for sure. By the way, I would have loved to have been in one of Michael's lectures. I think that sounded very good. We could have a lot of fun, Michael.
Okay.
No, the industry actually, if there are a number of positives to come out of this, and I know it's difficult to kind of dig around and find those right now, but one of the things it did do for us as an industry is we kind of coalesced around what was essentially an emergency. And because of that, our voice was heard very loudly with the government. And we have not only industry representation through ALHA, but also individually as companies and our own advocate, our own government advocate and government affairs people. We had strong audiences with Steve Mnuchin, with Vice President Pence, and with the President himself, in order to make sure that our voice was heard loud and clear. And I would include potentially restaurants, etc., in that same voice. Because often case, I found in the 15 years or so that I've been in this industry, is that we're not heard as loudly as we should be, given how many people we collectively employ as an industry around the world. And so not only were we heard loud and strongly here in the US, but I can say that around the globe, we had the same level of impact, whether it was in the UK or in Italy, and my colleagues, and certainly in my business and in our industry, had the same discussions with governments around the world to recognize the importance of this industry as an employer. Literally the sheer numbers of people that we employ dwarf things like the car industry, the airline industry even. So we got our voice heard loud and clear, number one. Number two, we were able to change legislation, even though it was late in the day. There were a few amendments made to legislation here in the US that encapsulated certain things that were of benefit specifically to hotels that employed 500 people or less. That was a late amendment that we got inserted. And also to some of the more mechanical and technical things that will come around in terms of loans that can be applied for by the owners of our hotels. I mean, and just to remind, I'm sure that those people listening know, but our business in particular, and many of our competitors, we operate on a franchise model largely nowadays. So when I talk about our owners, we have 6,000 hotels around the world, and we have something like 5,500 owners. So the individual owners have these smaller business units effectively that they do employ less than 500 people. Cash is king right now, as it is for all of us. And in terms of being able to support individual team members, it was crucial to get in early to speak to the governments around the world to ensure that we are seen to be as important as we genuinely are in terms of the number of people we employ. And I think we did as best we could on what was for everybody effectively a scramble mode.
I thank you for speaking on behalf of the lodging community, Ian. And I want to let folks who are on this call know that Ian is with us today. He's not able to speak on behalf of Hilton specifically. And that's why we were fortunate to be able to have Ian with us today. So thank you for that. So when we are speaking to Ian about lodging in the community, we are talking about the industry as a whole. And I do want everyone to understand that for obvious reasons.
And sorry, just to be clear, the only reason I can't is just that we're, we're at the end of a quarter and we're going to be, as Wolfram will know, we're going to be reporting results shortly. So we've got to just be careful. I don't want to be too specific about the way that this has impacted us as a company, but I can certainly speak generally.
Which we appreciate. So thank you for that. Let's bounce to restaurants for a moment in a similar vein. And, do we think that restaurants might rebound faster than hotels or not? And Wolfram, perhaps we start with you and then go to Robert with that.
Yeah, for us, it's interesting to see that, building on Ian's comments, that people are cannot have issues at looking at cash, making sure that the people are taken care of. But I mean, it has like a tremendous trickle down effect immediately, because we see that a hotel buying something and then just to make sure that they pay the mortgage in the end and pay the people that are still serving guests or in the hotel. First thing that they do is they stop paying suppliers. And we're seeing like obviously a whole set of suppliers coming back to us. We're not going to get paid, and if we don't get paid, we got to shut our doors. We have a number of suppliers that are already coming to us and say like we can't do any delivery anymore. We're furloughing everyone, and we're going, I'm not saying out of business, but we're stopping. And this is for hotels on one side. It's the same story for suppliers that serve the food service industry. The ones that are coming out stronger here are those that are a little bit more diversified, that are serving from a food manufacturing point of view, that are serving retail as much as they're serving food service. These are the kind of people that have like a diversified business and henceforth can rely on the retail. You go to a retail store today and you find nothing on the shelf. We actually have people like Cisco and US Foods and the likes selling into retail stores with things that are typically food service items. So this whole kind of trickle down effect is brutal for everybody in this chain, and that's the reason why the effect of the legislation will hopefully help everyone in the chain to get like a loan to bridge the period of time that basically the business is stalled and hit pause.
Thank you. Robert, do you want to add to that from your perspective?
What we're quite frankly, the thing that we're most worried about is the smaller mom and pop restaurant chains, or as things actually have started to come out, some people who have invested in some beautiful, beautiful locations, spending millions and millions of dollars on them, but still small one or two restaurant chains. And that is where a core of our business is coming from. And we're praying that those people are going to be able to come back. We've actually started some funds along with a couple of other leading beverage companies to help that smaller people to be able to come back, and starting to look at other ways to help them get over this. But it is not looking good at the moment. And it's going to take a lot for them to come back, because as both Ian and what it has said, they have to bring back everything back into their restaurants because everything's out. One, they have to get all those employees. Will they come back? Will the good ones come back? And they hope they do. And then they have to restock the entire store again, and what the money that's going to take, and will there be suppliers to be able to do that? And then in our side of the business, on the liquor side, I'm hoping things are going to change, but especially for the small ones, is they, quite frankly, right at the moment, there is legal issues. If they don't pay their bills, they're not allowed to be shipped in a lot of states. And if they don't pay their bills, they don't get any liquor from anybody. And it's shut out for almost everyone in either wine, liquor, beer, whatever it is. So I'm hoping legislation is going to change inside of that to be able to give them more time to be able to pay those bills and not cut them off, so that they can come back on a much quicker basis.
Thank you for that insight. And playing off of that, for the students who are on the call right now, who might be looking for or thinking that they were having an internship for the summer or a possible job, and this is where we could use your guidance, if hotels might not be hiring at this point, who in hospitality might be hiring, or where could other companies or industries maybe value the experience and background of our students?
Well, just to piggyback on what we said about the restaurant sector, it is my personal prediction that that's going to be one of the areas that pops back probably faster than some of the other segments between airline, hotel, certainly cruise and things like that. Because I think there's going to be a tremendous amount of pent-up demand. And I was on the phone earlier today with a very senior leader within a casual dining chain who was saying that what they typically see when there's a disaster like a hurricane or a blizzard even, that there is a fair amount of pent-up demand. And now you're talking about people that have, been sheltering at home, self-isolating, or even quarantining for weeks on end, if not months. And speaking from personal experience where the dishwasher's running constantly and all of that, one would imagine there'll be some decent demand for people to get out there and do that. Having said that, I think there are a lot of other really interesting adjacent segments. I think some of them were touched upon, but things like senior living, while that's a very sort of sensitive topic right now because you have a very vulnerable community in those communities, you also have a situation where these are people that have to operate, 365 days a year without interruption. And so they are still very much operating and operating with real caution. And I think you'll see some additional hiring in places like that. But it's also been publicized a bit that there are places that are hiring in droves, like the Amazons of the world, like the grocery store chains and the pharmacies and things like that, like CVS and Walgreens. In fact, we're trying to help some of the hospitality companies take some of these furloughed employees and see if we can try and get them connected to the places where there are great needs. Because those folks that are on the front lines, never mind, the healthcare workers, but the people that are on the front lines working in the grocery stores and in the pharmacies are working tirelessly to keep up with the demand and to keep up with even just supply chain.
To that point, Leora, if I could just add
yes,
to
please.
what Anne said, because I think it's been really important, is, and this I can speak specifically to Hilton about, in the short term, and I add this is just the short term for now, we set up a portal with Amazon and a number of other companies that are actually heavily employing at the moment. There's something like 500,000 jobs. Now they're temporary jobs and relatively low skilled and low paid jobs. But from a hotel perspective, we've linked to, we've set up something called Hilton Workforce Resource Center and linked our team members, of which, we've probably got something around 50 to 100,000 people that are to some extent furloughed or out of work at this point, that are linked into this now, where people like Amazon, Walmart, CVS, all of these larger service-oriented companies that are doing lots of deliveries and work that's really picked up for them, link them at least in the short term. I don't think that's the longer term fix. Hopefully we're going to get a lot of these team members back, but it's certainly right now, mother is the source of invention, and everything we can do to move quickly is important. And I think one of the things that I've seen most incredibly as I've talked to team members around the world is the ingenuity that people have to be able to try and figure things out quickly. And as Robert said, as it relates to restaurants, I just look at, kind of where I am at the moment. And the restaurants, within a day or two of being semi-quarantined in our houses, all of a sudden you've got flyers, emails coming that we'll do deliveries, we've got the ability to continue using our kitchens. We want to figure out ways to get food to you. So it's not the answer for the long term, but it certainly helps in the short term.
Does anyone else want to add what your own companies or what you're seeing other companies doing for their employees at this time? Anne, it looked like you might be wanting to add to that.
I just was going to say that I would not be discouraged if you hear something like Domino's wants to hire 10,000 drivers. You certainly don't, want to get excited every day about graduating and going to be, driving around delivering pizzas per se. But think about how that funnels up. If they're hiring that many people, they've got to have people at the regional level and at the local level who are managing these folks. It does in fact trickle up. So it's not, while some of it is temporary, and as Ian said, we're really hoping to do come back to sort of core substantive hospitality jobs, I wouldn't discount some of those opportunities.
Anybody else want to add anything, Wolfram or
Yeah,
Robert?
Just a few things. Obviously, what I do appreciate about the hotel business, and if you look at a specific hotel, it has typically everything what a small business has. It has operations people, it has accounting people, it has procurement people, it has engineering people, it has all these functions that are out there. So if you want to stay in this business, think about a functional kind of lens on what you want to do. I know that we from the vendor side, we typically hire a lot of people that have procurement experience, and it doesn't need to be from different areas. But I think also the same kind of thing, if you've done, if you know some of those areas from within a hotel, that may be applicable to other industries as well. Now, obviously, in this environment where, what is the numbers were today, another 3 million people or so that, or more that applied for unemployment benefit, it's going to be tough to begin with. But from a functional lens, there's a lot of commonalities between all kinds of business and what is in a hotel.
So let me just ask one question before we turn it over to check our chat, because I saw a lot of activity in the chat with some questions for us. But is hospitality still a good business for our students? What do you think?
I would say yes. I mean, I'm bound to, right? But I would say yes, because I'm generally, glass half full anyway, and I think we have to stay positive. I think there's some fundamentals in our industry that won't change. The question is only how quickly and how quickly do we return to some degree of normality, and what does the new normal look like post this crisis? I think we're in the midst of it right now, and I'll be honest. I mean, I'm learning things new each day. Literally, as we watch people like Andrew Cuomo, dealing with what's happening in Manhattan, I learn a heck of a lot about how to manage through a crisis, because I think he's doing a great job, but also understanding what the new norm might look like. And it's going to look different. I think we all probably accept that it's going to be different once we get through this, in the same way air travel was different post 9/11. And we have accepted that's kind of become the new norm, that we travel the way we travel, right? In terms of aircraft. So I don't know what that's going to look like, but I do know that people will likely still want to go on vacation. People will still likely want to travel on business and do face-to-face, although I love Zoom. This is working rather well. But I think we'll want to have face-to-face meetings. I think probably large-scale conventions are likely to come back later rather than sooner. This will be probably a leisure-led individual business traveler type recovery. But we are gregarious by nature, and we want to travel. People want to explore. I think the industry fundamentally is still good. Demographics are in our favor in terms of global demographics and the way the populations are moving around the world, and the way wealth is being created around the world. So I think the fundamentals are still good. What I don't know is exactly what we look like post this period of time, and how that changes our approach to doing business. I think it could throw up some exciting opportunities. I mean, I think genuinely we may look a little different in the way that we travel and the way we use hotels, but I think there are going to be opportunities to think about things differently in terms of the excitement people can get from travel and the places that they want to explore, and how we run hotels. We may need to be more flexible going forward. There are things that we're going to have to do differently in order to be able to make it fundamentally people feel safe and secure when they travel. And hygiene now is going to be very high on that list. Whereas if you'd asked me this 6 or 7 weeks ago, I'd have said probably safety and security would have been the highest. Now these are at a par at a minimum.
Would anyone like to add to that in terms of, is hospitality still a good business for our students to pursue? Anyone have anything else to add to that? Thank you, Ian, for that. I
would just add is, I started inside of the restaurant business when I first got out of school, and then found Boston Beer Company and working inside the alcoholic beverage side of things. I think there's a fringe part is, the working right at a restaurant or working right at a hotel. I'm sure we'll come back at some point. But but there is this time where you might be able to think of other things that maybe you were possibly thinking about that you didn't think you were going to think about, but now this might be your area for you to think of other ways that you can still be part of the hospitality business, but not directly work inside of a hotel or a restaurant. That is one thing. And I also think what Ian just talked about to me, you just think about what is occurring on right now. And while you're at home and thinking about this, is what other businesses could be started and will be started because of all that is happening right at the moment. And there will be a lot of different ways of new things and people will do. And how could you be part of that new culture that we'll all be looking at? And when someone had a mask on in the past, you never thought, and what will that look like? And how will the gloves look? And what will the tables look like? And what space do you actually need? And is there something you could do in the short term to put between seats so you don't have to take out 50% of the seats inside of a restaurant? All those kinds of things to think differently that might be an opportunity for someone who is on the edge and looking for something to do at the moment.
So I hear innovation and entrepreneurial spirit and creativity. And that's what I would ask everyone to start thinking about if we haven't already in these last few weeks. Dean Upneja, there's been a lot of activity in the chat. I haven't had a chance to look at the questions. Do you want to maybe share a couple of the questions that we have from the folks who are listening in today?
Sure. So I think one of the interesting features that we have seen in the past is lack of high school students entering the hospitality industry, and everyone feeling, the pinch of qualified college-educated graduates. So Dr. Modi had a very interesting question as to how this is going to change. I'm wondering if you would like to ask the question, Dr. Modi. You're on now. Oops. Hold on, let me see. Okay.
Okay.
Dr. Modi, you're on.
Hi. Yeah, my question was to Anne and to really everyone in the, on the panel. But I was curious as to how you think this is going to impact employment in the hospitality industry in the longer term. And are we going to go from a shortage of skilled labor that we've had for the longest time to a bounty of skilled labor when things reopen?
I wish I had a crystal ball, but what I can tell you is that I think it's going to look a little bit different. You're still going to have operators running restaurants, running hotels, running travel businesses and theme parks and cruise lines and things like that. But I think one of the things that's going to come out of this is a really sobering look at efficiency. So if you had to determine who is an essential employee and a non-essential employee in your senior leadership team, what does that really tell you about the areas that are critical? And that may well inform future generation of functional experts. And at the same time, I think that it's going to reinvent different opportunities. So I think it's going to create different opportunities for people where we will both be determining how well does it work when we have everybody working from home. Is that in fact quite successful and surprisingly good? Or do you also then reinforce the, wow, I worked in an office all day, every day, and I always used to be envious of people that were able to work from home. Now I am working from home and boy, I can't wait to be back with my colleagues. So I think it's a bit of a mixed bag. I, again, don't have a crystal ball to determine exactly where those positions are, but I don't think that the interest in travel is going to significantly diminish. And that's not what I'm hearing from a lot of the people in the industry. But I think it's probably going to come back a little differently. I think that things like traveling locally and maybe, going someplace by your own car will come back before people will want to take their family on vacation on a plane, perhaps. And same thing, perhaps even on the cruise side, it may just shift, but I don't think it means that people decide, hey, staying at home was fantastic and I think I'll just not have vacations in the future, or I won't, myself, as soon as this sort of restrictions are lifted, I will be back into traveling for work right away. So I think there's a whole bunch of people that will be in similar positions, like many of our other panelists here who will probably likely be back traveling as soon as the coast is clear.
Dean Upneja, are there other questions that we want to field to make sure that everyone gets a chance to ask?
There have been some questions about the valuation. What is this going to do to valuation, to cap rates? Are there going to be a lot of distressed assets coming on, which is going to have an impact on the availability of hotels? Are some going to go under? So a lot of questions on that front.
Would anyone like to start to take that in terms of the value?
I'm happy. Well, I'm sure Michael will have a view as well, but I'm happy to kick off. I mean, the simple answer is almost certainly yes. There's going to be a revaluation of assets simply based upon the fact that we're going to be starting, coming out of the gate post-crisis. There's going to be a re-ramp to whatever that new norm looks like in terms of RevPAR. And that to a great extent is going to determine asset values for the near to medium term. I'm generally of the opinion, if a hotel was in a great location and it was the right brand for that location, that probably won't fundamentally change post the crisis that we have now, as it didn't in 2008 and 2009. But this is a reset. There's no two ways about it. I mean, and it's a fundamental reset globally, which is affecting all the financial markets. So cap rates are going to reduce. Interest rates are as low as they can go, pretty much. And so everything that's going to be done to revive markets post when the world thinks we're through the crisis is going to be a reset. I mean, one thing I can point to, and then obviously I'll hand over to Michael, but just because we felt it earliest, we have a couple of hundred hotels in China, all of which were closed in January. They're now pretty much all open. And we have a pretty good cross-section of focus service, Hampton Inns, that's 300 hotels in total, 200 upper upscale and full service, so from DoubleTrees through to Waldorf Astorias. But we also have 100 focus service hotels. And I mention that because they're Hampton Inns, and everybody in the US at least know, Hampton Inns are a great kind of bellwether for how Middle America is working, because it's one of the largest brands, and it's covers pretty much every street corner and major highway in America. Well, in China, they have started to recover reasonably well. And by that, what I mean is we're starting to get decent occupancy there, approaching 50%. Rates have yet to recover, but that, as we all know, comes secondly. The upper upscale full service is recovering slower, as you might expect. And international travel, I think Anne said that, is most likely to come last. I think what we're seeing is internal travel, i.e. travel within China, is driving a sort of recovery, and it's starting with the most cost-effective of the brands, i.e. lower down the food chain, as it were, than the luxury end of the food chain. If anything, I suspect that's what we'll see in the rest of the world, but we're much further behind than we are now right now in China. So I think that's going to be certainly an economic play across the board, and a revaluation of all assets is undoubtedly going to happen. But the financial markets are pretty smart. They're pretty effective. We in the US have a marketplace that is built up of a lot of REITs, which play into a certain tax category, which is not likely to collapse, but it might take, it's likely to take on a different shape.
Michael, is there something you want to add to what Ian shared?
Actually, Ian said everything okay, very well, but I think it's more the valuation actually going to be rebalancing, because NOI or EBITDA definitely going to be going down, and because of interest rate goes down, WACC goes down. So the valuation wise is going to be, they're going to maintain the same, but NOI, the long-term goal is going to be and how they're going to stabilize NOI. That will be key thing from operation point of view. So Ian mentioned those full service hotel going to recover slower pace. So the NOI level is going to be lower. That's why the asset price is going to be going down. So I think that will be one kind of a game we're going to see more and more. So also, instead of just using only cap and NOI, they're going to use a lot of EBITDA multiple, or just like equity valuation method. They're going to use a discount cash flow, or a lot of different way of evaluating property going to be coming out, I think, in financial system.
That'll be interesting to follow, that's for sure. I don't know, Arun, are there any other questions? I'm sure there are that we want to ask.
Right. So I want to switch to restaurants for a minute, and hopefully Robert can sort of answer. So a lot of changes happening in restaurants. In the dining is over pretty much in most of the country. So restaurants are switching to takeout and delivery. We all know restaurants operate in a very thin margin. So this is a temporary phenomenon. But what's going to happen when we come back? You know, restaurants pack tables close together. Are we now going to say there has to be more distance between the tables? Buffets are out. So what is that going to do to the profitability of the restaurant industry? And does there have to be other models, price? I mean, what else has to happen to bring the restaurants back into profitability?
Well, I think one of the things that we're seeing, the ones that are doing well and probably going to rebound the quickest after this, is fast casual. Because of the way the fast casual is set up, the way the stores are set up so that you can sit where you want to sit after you pick up your own food. To me, I think that's going to be the first one to come back. And then it is going to be up to what will people be able to feel like, and will they feel comfortable? And someone today, while I was on one of my calls, was talking about the middle seat inside of an airplane. You know, nobody ever really wanted that seat anyway. Now, how is that seat going to be occupied? And the same thing for that small little two-top, that deuce that's stuck between, you know, two other tables. What's going to happen with that? So we're seeing right now is fast casual is going to be the fastest one coming back. And we'll see from there afterwards, hopefully the recovery, but it's going to be something that's different. This is nothing we've ever seen this before, because it's about human nature and how close will you feel like. And maybe, Ian, if any of that you're seeing already in your stores in China, that people are coming back to the restaurants, or anything that's changed inside of the restaurants in China now that you've reopened the hotels?
Yeah, I think it's the things you suggest, Robert. I mean, the interesting thing about certain parts of Asia, as most of us would know that travel there, is that there wasn't a degree of social distancing, but there was a degree of focus on air quality, you know, and that meant that a lot of people actually wore masks. I mean, I've been in Shanghai and Beijing in August, and frankly, you need a mask, you know, because of, but for different reasons that we're thinking of it now. So there was a certain degree of focus on health, air quality in that region. And in China in particular, what we're seeing now, I think, is whilst the levels of occupancy are low, there's the ability to have social distancing without it being any kind of problem, either for the operator or for the individual. However, it's not financially productive at this point, you know, other than in fast casual, as Robert said. You know, I up until recently, as I think you know, I was chairman of Del Frisco's, and that's a high-end, you know, steak, effectively a steak restaurant chain. And there, you know, you have to effectively thrive on not only, you know, decent throughput, but you're filling tables, and so that will fundamentally be different coming out of this. I don't know exactly how yet, but I know they will have to think differently. Whereas for, as Robert said, I think it's a great example for fast casual. It's kind of built effectively in a way to operate like this. In the hotels, I suspect that we will have, you know, other changes that will be absolutely important for us to consider to encourage people to come back, and at the same time balance having, you know, occupancy and rates that will allow financial valuations to return to some degree of economic return for investors. Now that, you know, that's a lot to say in a sentence, but effectively what we're talking about here is saying that we can't have a hotel with 10 people in it. That model doesn't work. We're going to have somehow have a situation where a guest in a hotel feels absolutely comfortable that it's safe to go back, it's safe to eat there. They feel confident that not only is the food quality great, etc., but that it's prepared in such a way as that it's safe, and that whatever social distancing norms we're going to have, or social interaction norms that we're going to have, work in that facility. And that might mean, as I think Robert kind of alluded to, different layouts. Maybe this impacts design. Again, I'm speaking, without knowledge of an answer, just more of ideas at this point. But I know for sure it's going to involve some of the things that we were already looking at in terms of technology use on things like checking in. I think most of us that travel on airlines, for those that are a little older, we remember paper tickets. That doesn't exist now. We're used to going to a kiosk, or even better, just picking up your iPhone and using a ticket to check in. That will be in hotels. I mean, we were already trialing it. We already had it in about 400 hotels. I have no doubt we will have to accelerate that, because people are going to want to say, the less personal interactions I have, at least in the short term, the better. And therefore, standing in a queue to check in a hotel after a long flight is probably not going to be high on the list of, I want to do it. So having some technology-enabled things that will allow for kind of ease of travel, and particularly in hotels or maybe even restaurants as well, is going to be important. And certainly we're seeing in China, as this starts to recover, I'm sure it's going to push up the agenda as to how we manage this as hotels start to fill up. And it's not really just us, it's going to be everything, right? Whether it's a sporting event, it's a restaurant, it's a airline, it's everything that we do effectively where we have large-scale personal interactions.
So,
Wolfram, are you seeing? Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to ask Wolfram are you seeing any trends from your perspective? Sorry to interrupt, Arun, but we've heard from Robert, we've heard from Ian. Have you also identified or started to see some potential insights for what we might expect down the road from your view? Whoop, mute. Just unmute.
Thank you. Thanks.
Sure.
They're called the classic. If we're obviously looking at supply chain and the impact of on the supply chain of like what's happening from this virus, but also like before that on the things that were coming through tariffs and things like that. I don't think that in most cases the stuff that's relevant for hotels will have any impact on how it's going to be delivered, how it's going to be, where it's coming from. I think food fundamentally is a maybe not local business, but at least geographically, like within North America, it will be North American food. There's some that comes from overseas, but it's not that much. I'm just kind of curious how the discussion comes, and will there be more longer term produced in the United States of things that are of national interest, if you will. What's about the capacity of hand sanitizers? And it's not even like the hand sanitizers, it's actually much more complicated. It's like the dispensers for hand sanitizers, which are much harder to get to than it is the hand sanitizers itself. And that's kind of like the interesting things, how that's going to change. I just hope, like as the others folks on the panel said, that people need to be comfortable to travel. People want to be want to come back and want to have these experiences that they're missing for so many weeks now, and I don't know how long it's going to take until people feel really comfortable to be in a crowded bar again, or in a hotel when there's like a convention with 1,000 people sitting in tables of 8 or 10 each. When will that come back? And as soon as that is back, I think then we'll be all much happier afterwards.
Arun, are there more questions? Because I did see some more activity, and then we've got some, I'll shift gears afterwards to, again, the students and skill sets and resumes. So
there's some comments here. Sure that I'm okay. I know Serena loved Anne's point about moving to the senior living as we expected. So yeah, I think no more questions. I mean, I just wanted to follow up on Ian's comment about cleanliness. Is this going to, so there was this peer-to-peer, platforms like Airbnb and others where a lot of leisure travelers were gravitating towards. Is this going to cause some sort of a shift back to hotels? Because now you'll be able to sort of, make the claim that, yeah, we are doing all of these things to make ourselves better.
Yeah, I've got to be very careful how I answer that, but yes, I hope so. Yeah, I mean, look, forget that I'm in hotels myself. I think just look at this as a you know, an individual, as a family traveling with my family. You know, where do you feel safe is the first question, right, that you have to ask. And I think we as an industry, which is why I said at the very start, I do think there is opportunity here. It's tough to see it, and it's tough to believe in it right now. But, you know, if you think about this as hoteliers, if we have the opportunity to lead the industry back by convincing people post the crisis that it's safe to travel and stay in our hotels. And I would make a strong argument that we have the ability, because of the support of companies like Wolframs and others, where we have the ability to source very high quality, consistent product on a mass scale to be offered, in our case, across 6,000 hotels. You have the ability to be able to convince people that you're going to offer something that's safe and secure, right, from a hygiene perspective. I do think also it's going to beg for ingenuity and creativity to what that means in practice. And that could be some of the things I said from a technology perspective, you know, the ability to check in without actually meeting anyone or seeing anyone, through to, and I throw this out just as an example, but if we said to a guest, you know, do you want your room cleaned every day? Do you want it cleaned twice a day? Do you not want it cleaned at all if you're there for a week and just want new towels left outside the door because you're there with your family? Now that has lots of implications as to, you know, how secure a person might feel because they're going to interact less with, you know, people coming into the room. It has implications which are positive potentially for the environment because you're cleaning less. And it also has an opportunity for, like most things, to actually put in a different cost model, right? Now, I'm not suggesting we have the answers to all of those by any means, but this does make you think differently. So someone mentioned it, may have been Anne, you know, we think about different operating models as you come out of this. We're in an industry in many parts of the world where we have, it's a high you know, labor model that we operate. But we're not necessarily very flexible. We have very big fixed costs in the assets that we, you know, that our owners own, and we have lots of people working in those assets. So the question is, you know, if you think about this on a broader scale, what's going to be important to get the industry back on its feet? One is, for sure, people feeling comfortable to travel and feeling safe. Lots of questions that begs, how do you answer them? And then secondly, are there implications beyond just safety and security that actually afford us the opportunity to rethink this business to the extent that we have paperless check-in, that we have you know, the ability to operate under a different cost model potentially because of the way we're going to operate the hotels. So I do believe that the hotel model is a great model and has the opportunity to lead us out of this particular crisis versus, say, the shared economy and businesses like Airbnb, which absolutely have a fit, but are much more difficult to implement and answer those questions I've just posed, especially as it relates to consistency and quality and cleanliness.
An excellent point, Ian. And I think this is going to have an impact on pretty much every aspect of our industry, even restaurants, for example. You know, a lot of local restaurants, people prefer to go, and suddenly now chain restaurants can put together this narrative about safety and cleanliness and hygiene. I got an email the other day from a limo company which laid down step by step, you know, somebody will open the door for you, you will put the luggage in and so forth. So they had step by step showing us how they're going to protect us. So I think to a great deal, all of that is going to be very necessary if we are going to gain the consumer confidence back. So
I want to shift gears now, if that's all right, to our students and potentially to our alumni who may have been furloughed at this point. And Anne, perhaps we start with you. It's going to be a tough job market, whatever jobs are there, whatever industries are looking for jobs. How can we encourage our students in our Shaw community who are looking for opportunities to have their resumes stand out more? What skills do you recommend that they highlight or feature? And where would you want us to start? Would love for you to sort of take us through that thought process?
Sure. I think there are some really basic fundamentals around positioning yourself, and then also coupled with that, maybe a recalibration of your expectations going into a tougher market. The good news is, I think that unlike the 2008-2009 downturn, where coming out of that, if you were coming out of school in 2009, it was very, very tough to find opportunities and internships and things like that. And that was a slow recovery. Unlike that time frame, the benefit of this is we don't actually have a financial collapse. There's still actually a lot of money out in the market that will be able to capitalize on maybe some of the lower costs of particular assets or even particular companies. So a little bit to what Ian was referring to a while back. And so I think you have to go and be very, very smart with where you're going to be sending your resume and what it says. So if it doesn't jump out in terms of what value you can add to their organization in their set of circumstances, I think you need to go back and spend a little bit more time thinking about it. Doesn't mean you have to have 50 different versions of your resume. I'm not suggesting that, but it does mean you do need to do a little bit of additional research to sort of meet that employer where they're at. So understanding what it is that they're going through and where the specific needs are. I have been talking to a lot of senior leaders about some very tough decisions they've had to make about their own senior leadership team. And one of the comments that was made to me was, well, I certainly can't, lead my business without a strong CFO. And I absolutely have to have a general counsel. And I have to have somebody leading this function and that function. And so what that then means is you're trickling down. Organizations are always going to need really strong financial people. In hospitality, revenue management isn't going to be diminished by this. Having real thorough understanding of how to both utilize data and maybe even more importantly, how to communicate the results of that in a business context is going to be really important coming out of this. Because how you communicate, how you're going to address making people feel safe and comfortable, and how you are going to make people feel like they want to put their leisure dollars with your company or your brand is going to be really important. So when you're thinking about where to send your resume, I would say, as scary as it is right now for these to be very uncertain times, really align yourself to what that company stands for, who they are, how they have handled this particular crisis, how the leadership has really come out. Does it feel genuine? Does it feel like they are really led by purpose? And once you feel like you have a genuine connection to that company, use that connection. Tell them that you are impressed with how they handle this particular situation. And don't be afraid to start in a far more junior capacity than you would have originally thought, because great, hardworking, smart people who are well educated at schools like BU will rise up in the organization. And if you're willing to make that sacrifice early on, if you're really dedicated to staying in hospitality and you really want to stick with restaurants, or you want to stick with hotels or some other segment, that will actually, I think, carry the day. I don't know if my other panelists would agree with that.
I welcome other thoughts about skill sets or how to make that resume stand out at this time. Would anybody else like to add anything? Well, let's talk about.
I would just take it as an opportunity because, people are going to be furloughed out of jobs. They're going to be taken out of their jobs, and those jobs are going to be open. And to see somebody who's smart and willing to work extremely hard at possibly a lower entry level of a salary than the person they just let go. I mean, you have to take advantage of the opportunities that are there. Unfortunately, somebody might have been there for 5 or 6 years and wasn't the greatest employee, and they could get somebody like you who is hardworking, smart, and it will come in at a bit lower range. It will actually look as an opportunity for them to upgrade, one, their personnel, and for the short term, take a little bit of dollars out of what their HR is at the moment. So I think it's a good opportunity for you to possibly look at some other things that somebody had been able to get rid of people that weren't doing the greatest of jobs, and they can now get it at a little bit lower rate than they currently were paying that person.
Would anyone recommend, thank you, Robert, for the underclassmen, for the freshmen, sophomores, and juniors who aren't necessarily looking for full-time work but need their summers? What would you recommend in terms of a useful way of taking advantage of the time with the summer ahead of us for the students to remain sort of value, to enhance their own personal value? Does anyone have any thoughts on that or suggestions?
I'll just give you one because I'm involved in another company called Freebird, which is an app that we actually encourage people to use to go to restaurants, and we give you discounts off of restaurants through Uber or Lyft. And through our discussions with Uber and Lyft right at the moment, they see that this coming out, them doing very well inside of Uber and Lyft. And if that is something you would be interested in doing, there's going to be plenty of jobs inside of Uber and Lyft because people are not going to want to use mass transit, especially middle to upper middle income folks are going to change the way that they commute to work or get to locations and not use mass transit. And Uber and Lyft could be a great way to play this in the short term if things come back slowly inside of the restaurant and hotel business.
Wow. Wow. Anybody else want to add? Anne, it looks like you might want to add something.
Piggyback on that. I think there are people at all different demographics who have never had an experience with a Grubhub and Uber Eats who are trying that now and seeing how that could transform their life, including getting delivery from Whole Foods through Amazon or getting Instacart or other delivery services. I would not discount that. I think that while some of that demand will go away when we can easily get out to the grocery stores ourselves, but I would say that's going to open up new possibilities for people that had never tried that before.
Arun, are there any other questions from the chat from our attendees that we want to ask before we wrap up?
I think we've asked most of the questions.
Okay, super. I just want to ask each of you personally, emotionally, what are you doing to take care of yourself during this time to help inspire us with some cool ideas? Because this is tough. How are you saying, I don't like the phrase, as everyone knows, I don't like this phrase, social distancing. I think it's a terrible expression. It's physical distancing. I think if anything, we're more socially connected than we've ever been before, frankly. But perhaps, Wolfram, let's start with you. What are you doing to sort of help get through this period from a personal standpoint, not just a professional standpoint?
This is for me the first time that I actually work an extended period of time from home. It's a totally new experience instead of going to the office and being there from early in the morning to in the evening. So one of the things I do is actually just block time on my calendar and exercise in the middle of the day, go for a bike ride, things like that. And I'm amazed how many people are out there just in the parks and other areas. I know that's not always social distancing, but it just getting some sunlight and getting other kind of things it helps me tremendously just to get through this.
Michael, what are you doing besides
I'm
teaching?
going to add, to piggybacking on Anna and Robert's point about the job experience. I mentioned many times in class, Charles Darwin theory, survival of the fittest, but that is kind of a change into 21st century. I coined a new word, survival of the wisest. How you develop your wisdom in your life. I put the equation in my board in the classroom. Wisdom equals to knowledge plus experience. And our students getting a good knowledge out of our curriculum and educational requirement. But also we are looking for students of 800 work hours. That's gonna be experience, but at this time, and it's totally different world environment. So as Robert and I mentioned, don't discount any job, just to gain experience, to develop your own wisdom. That's what I'm trying to do. And personally, I just go into basement looking for a lot of book collections, which I have missed before. I found one today, and normally airline, when I'm traveling, Delta Airline, they normally put out a lot of magazines and newspaper in the lounge. I pick up everything, and then on the plane, I used to read it. And one report, Carnegie report, published 2008 about think tank. And I mentioned it many times in my classroom, our students using social media a lot, so spare little time, read website of think tank, such as Brookings Institution, American Enterprise Institute, Aspen Institute, Hoover Institution, lot of information, especially nowadays, McKinsey company, on daily basis, they are put out COVID situation impact on business environment. So knowledge is power. So get knowledge base during when you have a time, and don't discount any job. Add your experience to enhance the value of your wisdom.
That's
Thank you.
incredible advice. Thank you. Thank you. Robert, what are you doing in terms of keeping yourself through this personally?
I have two littler, smaller kids, so they're not that small, 10 and 12 years old. They're learning all about cards and board games. So that's kind of the fun part, to teach them all about cards and board games. And then the other part to me on work side is doing things that are important but not urgent. And the luxury of being able to do things that are planning actually right now for 2022 and 23. And what can we do to get ahead of ourselves, and things that are important but not urgent, which are very usually hard to do in everyday work life, but is starting to be able to do now.
I actually find that optimistic to think you're planning for the long term. So that's very good news. Wolfram, what about yourself or Anne?
Wolfram, go ahead.
No, and I already mentioned what I do.
Yeah.
I read so much. I do like, as a McKinsey alumni, I need to shout out to Michael. I do like these daily emails. They're really, really informative.
That's great. I would say I actually took some good advice from my 18-year-old freshman BU student who is my daughter living with us now, doing her online classes. And that was actually to limit the consumption of news every day. It's everywhere. Every story, every headline, everywhere is about COVID and what's happening, where it's happening. And so I kind of limit myself in the mornings to getting updates in the mornings and kind of a bit at the end of the day. But I found myself getting very anxious and just having a lot of unproductive thoughts and time when I was getting way too much information. And so I think it's a fantastic time to, focus on, calling up friends that you haven't talked to, and really giving yourself some routine and some purpose, like, whether or not it's cleaning the garage or organizing the linen closet in my case. But it is giving myself things to do that are productive, because I am still working from home and working full time. But it is weird when you're not traveling and you're used to being so incredibly busy all the time, that now there's a really great time to catch up on movies you haven't seen, find fun movies for your family to watch or for you to watch with your friends. You can watch and have your friends watch, and then you guys get online and chat about what did you think of this movie. I think those kind of things are really fun. And same thing with, whether or not it's gathering your friends on Zoom and, reconnecting with folks. I'm doing that with my high school friends, and in the evenings, just doing a half an hour Zoom with everybody. And I already saw them and had a good relationship with them, but it is really fun to keep doing stuff like that.
Super, thank you. And Ian, how are you getting through this personally?
Well, I wish I had as a prosaic an answer as Michael about all the things he's reading and how wise we can all become. I would say that knowledge is definitely power, and my knowledge has been developed in that I found out that my 3 dogs are absolute chaos during the day, and they're keeping me busy just on their own. But no, I think beyond that, joking aside, it has been actually quite interesting to be at home all this time, and and be able to see what's happening at home. But what what I do kind of try and force myself to do each day is, as Anne said, I don't dwell too much on the news. I like to catch up in the morning. I like to catch up in the evening, and then in between be as productive as possible with kind of business and the teams that we have around the world. But I'm also carving out time specifically to think about what next. And for us, you know, it's some of the things that we've discussed on this call, you know, because we will come out of this. I don't know what we're going to look like, but I know we're going to come out of it. The economy, as I think Robert said, before the crisis hit, was actually one of the strongest any of us have experienced around the world. We've had a 10-year run of fantastic economy here in the US. I think we were ready for a reset. It just wasn't going to be quite as big a reset as we've seen. But that said, it's a question of what's next. And I like to think of the world as, my particular glass is half full. I'm positive. And so I spend time now thinking about, with my colleagues and teams, you know, what are we going to do next? How are we going to get this business back into great shape and enjoy a growth spurt, you know, some point in the future, as we've seen in the last 10 years. So it's tough to think about those things all the time, but, you know, once you've got through the mechanics of the day, it's important to start thinking about what we're going to do differently and what we're going to do next.
Well, I think that's a perfect way to end, knowing that there is a what's next. And I think that's what everybody needs to hear. I think we've gotten some great insight for our students, for our alumni, for our undergrads, for our grads, about, you know, how to position ourselves personally and professionally. You know, it's okay to take a job that we may not have wanted to take originally, but it shows that we're working and that we're staying relevant, and we still have to pay the bills somehow, don't we? So we've got to take those jobs, but position yourself in a way that makes you meaningful in a time that's appropriate for today. I think by listening, first of all, for the folks who are on the call today, thank you, because the breadth and scope and the range that you represent, I think was really also very insightful for all of us. To hear your viewpoints. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Dean Upneja to close at this point, but thank you to Ian and to Michael and Wolfram and Robert and Anne for sharing a little bit of your insights with us, and hopefully it'll keep us motivated, sober, but motivated to know that there is a what's next, and we'll get through it somehow, but it's up to us to stay creative and innovative, isn't it, to know and build what that what next is going to look like.
Not too sober though.
No, no, we've got to have some Boston beer.
Very well said.
And on that
So,
note, Dean Upneja, for wrapping up.
well, at the end, I just have a whole lot of thanks. Thanks to everyone who participated today. While this road to recovery may be uncertain, I think there is hope for all of us, hope for our society, hope for our profession. So that's, I think, good news. I think we all need to change how we operate, how we think about our careers, and how the business is going to change. But I'm confident that with the education all our students and alumni have received from our fantastic faculty, that you will do a good job of changing yourself. Professor Quagg, I just want to say that I think Ian and I will be joining your next class. Watch out for us. I want to seriously thank our panelists for responding on a very, very fast notice. We just contacted you Monday and Tuesday. Thank you for your willingness to share insights with our students and alumni. Just for everyone listening, all the panelists are members of our advisory board, and we truly, truly appreciate your commitment to the school and profession. I also want to thank our staff and faculty for turning around the entire ship to remote instruction at a short notice, and everything you're doing to keep us afloat. Thank you to the alumni who are listening. We are determined to stay connected with you. So if we can be a sounding board for you at any time, please reach out. Finally, the biggest thank you to all the students that are here that are listening. Thank you for your patience as we try our best to assist you during this time. So thank you all for listening, and please stay safe.